Thank you for joining us at this panel. I think we have three incredible leaders today. We have operators, we have consultants, and we have investors. So we pretty much cover the entire spectrum. And I think to Gaurav's panel, we are like the version 2 of Gaurav's panel. If you all know, he's actually talking about private capital. And now we're going to kind of one-up him, okay? So let us start. Maybe I'll just give you a bit brief context on what the panel is about. So we are at this fascinating inflection point in education across Asia. Over the last decades, I think we've seen multiple companies actually scale beyond their home markets, from tutoring to skilling to early learning, all trying to be regional platforms. Technology makes it easier to scale, but regionalization is actually much harder than it seems. The same playbook actually never works twice. I think we all can attest to that. Companies that succeeded in Vietnam doesn't necessarily have to succeed in Indonesia or Philippines or Thailand, for that matter. Each country has its own consumer behaviors. They have their own government regulations and they have their own cultural expectations. And we know education is deeply rooted in nature for that. So that's why we talk about this topic, smart talent and strategic capital. It's not about who raises the most money right now. It's about who finds the right partners, the right team, and the right financial structure or financing structure. So I think in this context itself, we have 4 themes in this topic. I think the first thing we'll talk about is scaling. So we have operators and investors over here. I'll try to squeeze as much knowledge out of them as possible in terms of what scaling is about. The second topic, it's smart capital. I think patience capital has been talked about for the last panel, but let's see what they have to say about that. And the third is a new customer perspective. It's a new customer stack. It's something very interesting that consumer businesses should look at, and then we will talk about it as well. And the fourth and last is exit. I think it's the most important for a lot of investors over here and operators as well, because you have investors on your cap table. So let's start with the first topic. Let's start with scaling. I'll direct my question to Paul. So Paul, you've built multiple platforms. You built platforms across multiple markets before, right? My question to you is that, what do you localize at headquarters? And, what do you actually, regionalize?
Yep. Thanks for that. I think the first thing is that the value proposition of the product, the service needs to be absolutely unique. Without that, there's no opportunity to scale. So it needs to provide better value. It needs to provide better service. It needs to be cheaper. It needs to be more accessible than anything else in the market. So that core is essential. And then from there, how the system operates needs to be standardized as well. So the infrastructure around that could be the technology infrastructure, the learner management systems, the customer acquisition systems need to be standardized. But from there needs to be quite a lot of flex in the system. Because as you mentioned right from the beginning, every market is slightly different. But not only that, you're being buffeted by the competition, you're being buffeted by government regulations, and so you need a lot of flexibility in how that product is then communicated to the consumer or to the end user in that market. You need to provide your partner in that market, or you need to go into that market entry strategy with some clear ideas that what you did in one market with that same product is definitely not going to work in another market. So you have to really understand that market. And either you do that, or you find local partners, JV partners, franchise partners, licensing partners who kind of implicitly understand that. So it's like an onion. The core has to be really, really strong. The systems to deliver it need to be strong, but then how it's then communicated needs to be really modified and customized to meet that market need.
Got it. Maybe just to add on, Sheinal, I think maybe this is something for you. Maybe can you share a time when, centralization has gone wrong for you? Maybe you over-localize and lost scale, or you kind of under-localize and lost adoption?
So we haven't regionalized yet, right, as you know, Shaun. So it's really been about expanding locally into multiple locations and adding more education centers into our platform. And some of that's done through our own brand organically and otherwise through acquisition. I think that's where the nuance lies for us when we acquire, when we grow. Like, what's your system for acquisition? Like, what are you adding? So there's two levers, right? Revenue, costs, right? On the revenue side, I think Paul mentioned having that strong system for sales and marketing, for example, would be one of those things. Additionally, maybe new products, things that you have as part of your core stable. On the cost side, that's again, I think to Paul's point, really about like how robust are your systems and processes. And we've been learning. I mean, we've built our entire internal stack on our own because we couldn't find anything out there to do it. And so we've built this way to manage both a marketplace model as well as managing our own programs. So we work as a sort of hub and spoke model. And that's had challenges in terms of how we implement it and how we get our, the target companies to understand how we operate. Why are we moving invoicing away from a traditional format, individual sending an invoice monthly to being on platform, automated with direct debit payments and all the rest of it. So I think it's more about that for us, managing that balance of wanting to move forward really fast with localizing, if you want to call it that, or centralizing rather, versus the nuance of an acquisition and a deal and the people involved, right? I think that's probably the bigger thing for us at this stage.
Great. So I think, Carina, now it's up to you. After hearing both of them speak, what do you see actually is the common mistake that operators do when they are trying to scale?
Yeah, I think one of the common mistakes I observe is that when operators try to scale, they tend to think that it's quite easy or is easily replicable, especially if they're already very successful in a certain country. So when we help operators to scale, like for example, Keppel actually provide facilities, campuses for operators, right, K-12 operators or universities. We tend to also help them as well to connect them to the local players, like whether is it tax consultant, legal consultants and all, in which will help them to understand the market further. The other thing that I think operators need to be aware of is every time when you enter the market, it's best to do a very thorough research. Research not so much just on the market, but on the parents' preference, what are the parents looking for, what are the motivation behind it. For example, why in Malaysia, in Thailand, what are the motivation of parents sending their kids to international schools? It's actually because there is a perceived gap between the public and the private schools. So parents rather pay more to put their kids to private school. On the other hand, on the developed Asia countries, for example, Korea, Japan, why do parents want to put their kids in international school? Because the system is too stressful. So there is actually various reasons, and if you understand it, you would be able to cater your solutions better for them. The last point I want to make is actually finding the right partners. A lot of the K-12 operators or even like preschool operators, when they expand, they tend to enter into franchise agreement. But be careful of choosing who are your partners. It's because if you choose the wrong partner, firstly, whatever brand that you build at home or build well, it would be tarnished. So actually very important to kind of have a very thorough KYC, we call it, with the partners. Yeah.
That's really, really hard. I think, if you can get it kind of 60% right, 40% wrong, you're doing really, really well with that. I don't know anybody that's got a really robust system for that. We work with some of the largest education providers globally, and it just died on the vine. We don't work with kind of the traditional mom and pops, but we've worked with kind of one level above in terms of sophistication, and they put their life savings into it. They put everything into it, and it worked unbelievably well. So if anybody has a foolproof system on selecting your partners, we'd be keen to know, but it's really difficult.
Can I riff off that? Can you just share more about why it dies in the vine? Like, what are the reasons in your sense? Is it just like cultural mismatch? Is it, I don't know, the systems and processes? Is it something else? Like, what are the main things? Because you've seen this time and time again.
Yeah, and I've been on both sides of it as well. I think it's, because they have their core engine, their big business. The reason they came to you is because that business is maybe under some kind of stress. It could be competitive stress. It could be an aging product that's losing relevance and they want something new. They don't want to invest in themselves to do it. Either they don't have the capability or the time. And so they feel that they can buy that from you, but then they don't have the DNA within their organization to do something different. So they're used to running this big engine, and that engine may be deteriorating and going down, but they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit. They don't have the systems internally. They don't truly understand your product, your brand, your values. And then their core business is continuing to deteriorate. And then obviously they're under pressure financially to recalibrate back to that. So they lose focus.
Great. I think those are very insightful answers. I hope you guys took down notes because I didn't took down any notes. So let's go on to the next topic. Okay, good job, Chetu. Thanks so much. So let's go on to the next topic. It's about smart capital. So I know you guys heard about patient capital a lot, but let's hear it from Carina herself. She runs Capital Education Asset Fund. It's one of the biggest fund in terms of education investments. And I actually personally am curious to know, what smart capital looks like in 2025. And to her, is it more about, patience? Is it about control, or is it about structure? Or something else?
So I think for smart capital, I would, capital is capital, right? There's no smart or whatever capital. It's how you use the capital. So when we come to looking at capital, I would group them into two groups. One, we call it the private equity capital. The other one is capital backed by asset. So I think what capital does is that we actually provide facilities and campuses to schools for them to expand. So we call ourselves, our capital is backed by asset. And school just pay rental income, for example, and they have full control of the operations. The other capital that I would think that is like private equity, whereby they may take a stake in your operating platform. Then those are the capital that you may lose a bit of control. And there's no right or wrong of which capital to use. It actually depends on the founder's mindset, as well as which stage of growth they're at. So I would say, and also, private equity capital not necessarily says that you lose your control and you don't have anything back. Because actually what is important, and we have seen private equity players putting money into companies and helping them grow very fast. And it's a win-win for everybody, right? Yeah, and they tend to go asset-like, yeah.
Hello, can you guys? Yeah, great. I think actually Carina brought up a very good point, and I think it's the elephant in the room, which is private equity and control. This is a very kind of toxic relationship we have in the past. So maybe I'll bring it to Sheinal. So Sheinal, you are an investor and a founder, right? What's one financing structure you would never take, and why?
Look, I think capital's capital. Thank you very much, Carina. That's true. Money's money. I think the structure, I think I mentioned this before, it's more about trying to be solutions oriented, right? Rather than trying to think about specific type of capital, debt, equity, convertible note, revenue financing, whatever it might be. There's a whole plethora of things, but it has to be suitable for that business. So when I think about smart capital, I think about people who come around the table and work with us to think about that capital structure. Right? That's appropriate for our business. So if we're now acquiring businesses, what does that look like? What do we need? If we're going to look at organic growth, what do we need? If we're going to look at an asset-backed play, potentially, that's a different set of capital. So I think smart capital to me is capital that's cognizant of what the business is and where it's going, rather than forcing ourselves down an avenue because of the type of capital. E.g., you take venture capital, you've chosen a path, right? Like that is a path, that's a choice, and that you're going to have to deliver those returns. If you take private equity, it's another type of exit outcome. So I think we all need to be aware of that. I mean, for me, when I look at term sheets and things like that, it's really around, kind of prohibitive terms, like reserve matters, where, I think for me, the smart capital is now trying to be much more founder friendly, whereas, what I'd say is more traditional investors might still have very onerous reserve matters, where basically you show that there's not much trust in the management team. I've seen term sheets where investors would like to have veto rights over executive hires. I don't know that that's the right way to approach a relationship from a long-term perspective. I think much better said, I'd much rather have somebody around the table who's going to help me through these decisions, and I'd like to be part of that decision, or can I interview them, or is there any way I can help with an advisor that's going to help you interview better candidates? Much better way to frame that same outcome, right? So again, it's more like working with the founders and the business to generate the right solutions for them.
Great. I think, Paul, maybe to you on this question, do founders underestimate how capital structure can constrain future scaling? And any examples where the wrong structure actually slowed expansion?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a zero founder, so you're the person that came up with the idea and you want to develop it and grow it, and I mean, you need to spend 3 to 5 years to actually prove the concept before it can really scale, and you can be convinced that you have a fully viable system or process or product. So the more time that they're spending on their product and proving the product is better for everybody. Getting into sophisticated discussions around funding, I think, can often distract, at best, the founder from what they really need to do. And also, I think too much capital is deadly for a founder as well. Yeah, it just accelerates the mistakes. I mean, because there's mistakes that are going to be made anyway. I mean, no one's going to get it right 100% of the time. But if they've got, serious amount of powder on them, that it's just going to exaggerate those mistakes. So they need to be very, very economic with their resources that they have, and they need to prove to themselves that they actually have a scalable and viable product. So I think, they need to put their head down and their bum up for 3 years, 4 years, then they can pop up. And then as they're progressing and as they're scaling, more sophisticated investors can come on board that can help them with that scaling process because they may not have that skill set.
So you mentioned, maybe operators can't take in too much capital, but how much is too much? I mean, my question to you is that, there must be a certain threshold that you're raising capital at. How do you determine that?
How much would you give up as a founder? Is that the question? You want a number, or?
I want to know how what's the formula? What's the formula you take?
I think it's just as much as what you need, and probably half of that is what you really need. So, your objective is this thing has to make money. It has to be profitable. You can't just keep on. Obviously we read the news, about these guys raising this and raising this and raising this. I don't think that's the reality for most entrepreneurs and most founders. I think you've got to have a profitable and efficient business. So I don't know what the number is. If after 5 years you've lost more than 20% of your business, ownership of your business, I think you gave up too much along the way. You didn't focus on driving revenues and making sure that model was truly going to be profitable.
Just to add on to what Paul says, right? In private equity, or what we do is that normally we ask the company, so what are your sources of funds? It could be debt, it could be equity, right? Or it could be, these are two main ones. And then we ask them, how you going to use your money? So let's say, like what Paul mentioned, if you can release the market, right? If the market give you 500 million, just take it, right? But how are you going to spend it? You need to really think about, okay, the next step is, if I can raise 500 million today, how am I going to use the capital in order to generate the returns for our investors? So because it's not so easy to raise funds these days, so I do suggest, for example, if you get funding from private equity, your business is good, take it, think about how you're going to use the fund. Yeah. And discuss with the investors. Yeah.
All right. I think now we all got the ballpark number from Paul. You can just kind of take it down. I'm kidding. No, you don't have to take it down, guys. So anyway, I think at the end of the day, all this money itself has to go somewhere, right? In the end, it's being utilized by operators, and the end users are your parents, your teachers, your students. So now let us kind of transition into a new customer perspective that I'm talking about. There is some talk to it. It's about business to family. It's no longer just about the kids themselves. It's no longer about just the parents, because we understand that, in K-12 school, the early years are usually the parents that are paying for the kids. And when you grow up, in later ages, it becomes the students that starts paying for education. In university, it's maybe a blend of parents and students, but when you go as an adult, when you upskill, it's all your money now. So there is this entire lifetime value that we're talking about. And I think I want to direct my question to Sheinal, because for his business, he's done, not just engaging the students themselves, but also engaging the parents. He's built an entire ecosystem itself. So, my question to you is, how does treating parents as active stakeholders change your business model? And how does this lifetime value design change?
Let me reverse back a bit and tell you how we started Agora, and it'll give you a sense of why the family is so critical to the component of what we do, right? Actually, it started, Tom, Colin, and I, a gentleman sat right there in the middle, who looks like he's assessing me today. Tom was a non-executive coming back from Boston. His wife and I were on a program together. And Tom was a global advisor to UQT for education. He was driving his kids around from math to Mandarin to English to science, whatever it was. And I was starting to do the same. My kids were younger. And the realization was, this was just during COVID, or the tail end of COVID. And what was really interesting to us is all of our family friends were telling us, can't wait till school reopens, can't wait till the tuition center opens, because I can't manage the care component. It's not just the education component, getting them to dial into the computer, but it's that care and custody component too. And so we're like, well, why don't we just bring everything together under one roof? And that's really the genesis of Agora, right? Agora is the Greek word. It means the meeting place, the forum. And at Agora, if you come to our center, there'll be a play school, preschool, student care, tuition enrichment provided by 25 different or 30 different education providers. You can do chess, Aikido, Taekwondo, math, Mandarin, English, science, a whole gamut of subjects in one place. The idea is that families and children will need different things at different stages of their journeys, right? It's not appropriate to necessarily push and ram math at, K2. But, that child might really enjoy learning about chess, or might want to do something different. And that's the idea of Agora, right? So when you think about families at the center of our engagement, it really is. And you come into our system, we have our own platform, you can see all the different subjects that your child's taken or taking, they can see all the check-ins, they can enjoy sort of preferential rates across the programs. If the child's coming for a preschool, play school program, the other child might come for student care or tuition enrichment. It's all under one place in a safe environment. And that's really the genesis of it. So it's not really about LTV as the input. LTV is the output of what we think is the problem we're solving, right? And that's really helped us because families can stay with us for a lot longer. So if they don't want to come to student care anymore, that's fine. They might still stay on to do dance, or if another child's coming, they might come into our play school instead. So that's how we think about it. It really is a community as a result.
So I think we've spoken about LTV, and maybe Carina, I think I want your perspective on this. So in terms of business model, when you see companies tackling the entire family spectrum, especially, for example, like Agora, do you think it's defensible? And, what are the unit economics of it? Do you think it's more attractive compared to just tackling the parents or students alone?
Definitely, you have to attack the whole family unit. Yeah, I mean, I can quote you some examples when parents bring their kids to international schools, right? K1 to 12. Parents and the kids must love the place, and the parents are willing to pay, right? After seeing the facilities. So this K1 to 12. And then you have the university students, whereby, for example, they'll rent the student housing, or we call it the purpose-built student accommodation from you. Guess what? First-year students usually come with their parents. Even if they are second year and they decide to live outside, not within the university campus, or they want to stay out with their friends, they will also ask the parents, because at the end of the day, the parents are the one paying for it, and they respect them, right? Which is actually a very important thing to learn. Yeah, is asking them out of respect, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I built, well, I didn't, not me. There's a group of us that built a whole education business because of dissatisfaction with the school's engagement with us as parents. So it was, my daughter was in grade 3 at the time, going to the parent-teacher interviews, which are horrible experiences, I'm sure, for the teacher more than anybody else. And so they're great. They were giving us all the feedback on, the English standards, math standards, the Chinese. But okay, it's kind of interesting, but not that interesting. I wanted to know about her as a person. Is she curious in the classroom? Is she asking questions? Is she social? Is she shy in the classroom? And again, I don't blame the teacher at all, but the poor guy just said, she seems to get along with everybody. And so I just kind of just was crushed with that. That's the only assessment that he could make of this whole side of my daughter that's more interesting and is going to be more valuable than her current English or maths or science scores. And this was the most expensive and apparently the best school in Hong Kong. And this kept on kind of happening. So we built an alternative education system based on this to give teachers the tools so that they could give feedback on students' interests and aptitudes. And as a subsequent to that, I pulled her out of that school. Yeah. So it's very important to engage with the whole family.
Right. I think we have a couple of educators here. Maybe we should just pay that attention into mind. I'll do some rapid fire questions for this theme itself. So maybe a bit controversial, but let's just go with it. Everyone just give maybe 1 or 2 sentences to it. If you could kill one legacy education, what would you kill and why?
Yeah, the parent-teacher interview, especially by Zoom. Honestly, give me AI instead. Yeah, it's really inefficient use of everybody's time. It should be a nice, lovely, really informed experience. But the teacher's just unfortunately going through the process. They got 30 of these to do in, a really short period of time. So there's got to be a better way of us being able to track progress that's not just according to the standards of the curriculum, but again, provides this whole window into this beautiful child that you have that you want to develop.
I couldn't agree with Paul more. I also went through we call it the PTM, which is parent-teachers meeting. And I find the teachers are also very stressed over this because the slot given to every student or the parent is only 15 minutes. So, during the COVID period, I was waiting in the waiting room of the Teams meeting, right? And then, of course, now it's normalized. You go to the school, you sit there for 15 minutes. But I guess what is actually very important is that from the teacher's perspective, it's really stressful. They have to tick all the boxes and, they have to handle the parents at the same time. From the parents' perspective, sometimes you're there and you're supposed to start at 3:15, but end up you start at 3:20, and that means that you have lesser time as well. So it's a very stressful situation. So I feel that, to be more effective, it's best to do it like, for example, offline or, do it on other time. So I start doing the PTM at other times. So I don't call it PTM, I just say ad hoc. If I need the teachers to give any comments, I'll just write and then just give them a call at their convenience and then just talk over it. It's much better.
Okay, so not to crowd on the same topic, but I'll give some different. I actually think something you mentioned it earlier on. It's about helping teachers. It's lesson planning. And just look at how inefficient it is still, even with all the LMS, the learning management solutions and tools out there. It's incredible. Like, you're still seeing teachers who are having to prepare the materials, prepare like the individual capabilities for each child if you're going to that way. For our lessons, I feel quite bad for our teachers. They do a great job. We have these things called individual lesson plans. Every 2 months or 6 weeks to 2 months, we prepare a really detailed report for each child that tries to get away from this whole PTM thing and instead says, the parents actually comment on that report card. They say, what's your feedback to our feedback? And the teacher says, actually, this is what's required over the next 2-month period. This is what we're going to work on for your child, specifically based on different milestones, right? It's really different. But then when you then go into the lesson, they obviously have to plan their lessons in a differentiated way, right? And so one of the things we're testing and working with is trying to use AI again to help generate multiple lesson plans within a single session for different children's needs. So that might mean if you're going to go into a classroom and you're looking at shapes, but you might be looking at shapes in different contexts, right? So it might be for that child that, they've already hit a learning milestone. So you want to be talking about shapes in the context of more complexity or colors and size, and the other one might be just something else. And you have to have all these different learning stations set up for this. So it gets quite hard for a teacher, right? And we're trying to figure out ways to make that easier. So it's probably one of the sort of legacy is old learning management systems that are just standardized would be my pet peeve.
Got it. So in general, PTM, guys. Now I know how my parents feel. Okay, let's move on to the last topic. I think we're left with 2 minutes and then we can go for one question. The last topic is to everyone here. What's the most exciting pathway for regional education platforms in the next 5 years? Is it IPO, PE consolidation, strategic alliances, and why?
I don't know if it's particularly exciting, but I think it's going to be, if you look at the exits in the last decade in Singapore, Southeast Asia, it's probably 80% of them are going to strategic buyers and or private equity. So that's kind of the path, I think, for especially mid-market companies. So anything up to $250 million, that's going to be the path. And there's so few IPOs of any size. And somebody else mentioned it in one of the other panels. I mean, how many education IPOs do we know of, right? I think it has to be strategic buyer and or PE.
I think for school operators, there's a lot of options. If you have a good platform, a single platform, you can actually sell it to a regional platform or a global platform, right? So that's one way. And there are other ways like PE buyout, whereby the PE firm may buy out 95% of your stake and 5% you retain because you believe that the business will grow, and you continue to work as part of the company. Then of course there's another PE buyout whereby, they buy you out totally and you just work with them for another 2 to 3 years, right? So, and another thing that I was chatting with Shaun at the side is, for example, for K-12 platform, if it grows very big, right, you can consider recapitalization, of the platform. That means your existing investor stays in, but they get to take out maybe 50%, and the rest you recap. So valuation goes up, you get new investor come in to validate the valuation. So that's another way that I see increasingly the bigger platforms are adopting.
Yeah, I think I'm not trying to steal Agora's kind of idea here, but the businesses that I see doing well, I mean, if you look at whether it's a karate school or an English school or a math school or a swim school, the business model is basically exactly the same. How you acquire the customer is exactly the same. How you communicate with the customer is the same. Obviously, the service at the end is different, and we shouldn't confuse them. But I think, that kind of consolidation and building platforms where you can, the hardest part of these business models is obviously the customer acquisition. So if you can capture that data, there's multiple services that you can provide to that consumer.
Sounds good. So I have time for one more question. I'll leave it to the floor over here. Anybody have any questions? Come on, guys. We need to use full time. Yes.
So one of the things I've noticed with successful platform companies is their inordinate ability to source debt more than equity. And is that something you've used in your businesses yet, or do you feel that will be super important at the right time? You and I discuss it all the time, Sheinal, but still.
Look, I think it'd be a fantastic vehicle at the right time.
We started quite early with venture debt, and obviously one of the things for us is just getting on that credit curve, right? Meaning to say that having that repayment history, your next borrower or your next lender will understand that you've been able to draw down and you've been able to pay, but also it's dependent on your growth, right? So if we're buying cash generative assets and we're thinking about the type of structures that would suit that, that's perfect, right? Leads to less dilution, gives us more scalability and all the rest of it. So absolutely, core part of it. And you're seeing actually an emergence, a huge plethora of private credit growing in Southeast Asia now, right? Maybe not all at the right price, but certainly at least it's a good move in the right direction, I think.
Right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, panelists, for coming to this panel.